Hey, welcome into Stone Cold Stros. I'm Brandon Strange with Charlie Palillo and Josh Jordan. Go follow both of them on X at Palillo and at Josh Jordan SCS. On today's episode, following all the reports of coaching departures, we finally have an arrival. Kinda. Speaking of departures, a couple stars from the 2022 World Series run have been cut loose. We'll react to that. And are we just maybe a couple weeks, a couple months away from JV Part 3? One Astros insider says maybe, probably. And speaking of MLB insiders, Ken Rosenthal raised some eyebrows this week with his comments. We'll let you decide if you're buying it or not. For all that, we announced a couple weeks ago that we acquired SportsMap and took ownership of our shows. A few of you have been kind enough to reach out and ask how you could support the show. Charlie, you have some news on that.
Well, as you mentioned, this is our business now. And from when the transition began about 2 months ago, completely unfunded. So all on us, from acquisition costs to startup and operational costs and everything going forward to maintain and ideally grow and maybe expand in other areas. So at the risk of sounding or feeling a little bit like Channel 8, where it's an ongoing fundraiser, here's the deal. It's a partnership with a site called buymeacoffee.com. And obviously, no obligation. It's a very soft ask. We're not seeking a gold mine here, but if there's a modest return on or affirmation of what we do and appreciation for it, hey, we are very welcoming and thankful at the same time. In the vein of coffee, I'm not a coffee drinker, but one of those fancy ones, $6 easily now? That'll be 50 cents per month over the course of a year. So if you see fit, great. If not, that's just fine too. But link, buymeacoffee.com/stonecoldstros, and on we go.
Appreciate that. And in lieu of that, you can support the show by hitting like on the video, subbing to the channel if you haven't already. Click that bell for notifications. We're on all your favorite podcast apps where you can listen. Just search Stone Cold Stros. Okay, announcements over with. We got news this week. We got a lot of news this week. We have a lot to get into, but news this week from The Athletic that Houston has outrighted several players, including Kennedy Corona, John Rooney, Pedro Leon, Luis Garcia, and Chaz McCormick. Look, the writing was on the wall, but it's brutal to see how this played out, just especially for guys like Garcia, who went down hurt, and Chaz. Both of those guys meant so much during that 2022 season, had so many big moments, although not as many recently. And that's why we find ourselves here. Guys, what are your reactions to these cuts?
Well, there are absolute pages in Astros lore for McCormick and Garcia. McCormick will forever be remembered for the catch of the Real Motu ball in the ninth inning against the Phillies in Game 5. But Chaz McCormick was a hell of a player for a season plus. 2022, pretty good. And then 2023, flat out terrific. OPS of 830 and just a crush side guy, right-handed hitting part of a platoon. And it just all Chazzy fizzled out. Shockingly so. How awful he was in 2024. Even worse in 2025 when he lost his job and, well, his Astros career. At least McCormick did make it to salary arbitration. He made $3.4 million in 2025 for just worse than awful performance. He turns 31 years old very early next season. He will find an opportunity to at least go to spring training with another big league club and get a shot to try to reestablish himself as the right-handed hitting part of an outfield platoon somewhere. But thanks for the memories, both McCormick and Garcia specifically. I want to add on Pedro Leon, who I think is a little microcosm of the state of the Astros in their farm system now. He was very highly regarded and hyped signing out of Cuba, $4 million. The Astros gave him in 2021. He immediately became a top 5 Astros prospect, amounted to nothing. Contact issues, better athlete than ball player, some tantalizing power and speed, but just never sustained. Got one little taste in the major leagues and was just a whiff machine. Now, he was not a draft pick, but he was a signing at first-round pick type money. And it's a reminder that the Astros have not taken a player in the first round who's become a good big leaguer since Alex Bregman and Kyle Tucker in the 2015 draft. That's now a fully 1 decade long drought. Yes, they lost 2 years to the punishment from the scandal, and they've been picking low in the first round. But you go 0 for a decade, and it's not like their second round picks have been bang up either. So Pedro Leon, 27 years old, what might have been, but it's really what he never was or became here.
Yeah, for me, Chaz, big memories of him taking Garrett Cole deep against, in Yankee Stadium, right down the right field line in the playoffs. Huge play right there from Chaz. And it's just injuries and poor play. And it just has not worked the last few years. And his arm became an issue in the outfield as well. So, and remember all the Dusty Baker stuff with Chaz? That was always just kind of weird. So I'm not that surprised because of all that in hindsight that maybe there's a reason this didn't work out. But either way, he'll always be remembered for that catch and that big home run. A lot of other big moments. It's sad to see him go, but Astros got to get this outfield figured out. So we'll see what happens here. You got Cam Smith out there. They're going to play Altuve, Jordan. Who knows? You got Jake Myers, bunch of other guys to think about as well. Sanchez, what are they going to do with him? So I just don't really think they had a spot for Chaz and all the other guys. I guess Pedro Leon's the one you were hoping that upside would finally come through. It never panned out. And Charlie's right. They got to get this thing figured out with batting and hitting and development in the farm system. It's unacceptable at this point.
In toast to Chaz, as he officially becomes an ex-Astro, a heaping spoon of banana pudding for all of us.
Indeed. And I agree with you, Charlie. I think he'll get a shot somewhere. And I wouldn't be surprised if he catches on someplace and, has maybe a few more memories left and that he can generate for another fan base. It's just a real bummer, unfortunately, just to see his trajectory and where he went. And obviously Luis Garcia, who didn't get to get his first big deal. So, and his career's in real jeopardy after having that second Tommy John. So that's who it's a real bummer, but just in general, it's just a bummer to see all of those guys not really reach their full potential. In the evolution or the life cycle of a team, there's comings and goings. On the coming side, maybe I should phrase that differently, but incoming, I should say, this week we got reports that from Brian McTaggart that a source tells him the Astros are targeting Victor Rodriguez to join the staff as hitting coach. Like we've talked about this ad nauseum, the need for change in that position. They are headed that direction. Are we excited about the acquisition of Victor Rodriguez?
No, I'm sure his family members and anyone else who's somehow attached to him, however many degrees of separation, which is not a knock on Victor Rodriguez if he's the guy, but he strikes me, like most hitting coaches, as a hitting coach. They're largely interchangeable. Maybe there's that very select upper crust that's really good, and then there are 2 or 3 toward the bottom who are really bad. And Rodriguez is probably in that big in between. I mean, you look at the Padres' offensive profile, and I'm not going to put it on Victor Rodriguez that Fernando Tatis's power production's kind of flattened out, that Luis Arraez never took any walks while banging out all his singles. Jackson Merrill's second season, not nearly as good as his rookie season. Someone has to get the job. So if Victor Rodriguez moves from the Padres to the Astros, good for him, I guess.
That's the ringing endorsement. Well, I mean, they have to hire somebody. That's kind of what it is with hitting coaches, right? Like, we don't know these guys that well. The only thing I could do was kind of dig into the numbers a little bit. And I get it, everybody. How the Padres produced on offense this year in these categories doesn't necessarily represent the job he did, but we don't have much else to go off of from afar. So the things I noticed, what do the Astros talk about? They want to get better at walking, not swinging so many bad pitches. They want to get on base more. So in that sense, the Padres were 16th in walks last year. The Astros were 26th. So, okay, I know the players and how they are selective, I know has a lot to do with it, but this is what we're going with. Also, on base percentage, Astros were 15th, not that bad. Padres were 9th. They were better. But you go look at OPS, Astros are actually better at 14th versus 16th. But in runs scored, Padres a little better at 18th as opposed to 21st. So in those, getting runs, scoring runs was a problem when guys got on base. Getting on base was a problem, and walking was a problem. Padres were all a little bit better in those categories than the Astros were last year.
Yeah, a little bit better, which to me, it goes to the players. Yeah. There's no aha that, wow, Victor Rodriguez, this must be a point of emphasis because look at the clear disparity in the numbers. So I will default to he's a hitting coach. I mean, whoever they hire, they'll introduce. He connects with the hitters. He teaches very well, blah, 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 blah. If Yainer Diaz is going to be back with the Astros and stop being an embarrassment, swinging at everything out, is it going to be because the new hitting coach beat it into his head or somehow a light bulb of whatever wattage came on for Yainer Diaz?
Yeah, and I think the house cleaning that occurred was earned, but no one's going to be a miracle worker. You can't expect anyone to come in and make chicken salad out of the entire lineup. He needs players. The lineup was supremely mid for most of the season, especially the second half, with runners in scoring position, plate discipline, yada, yada, yada. We've talked about it. We beat it into the ground here, but they need help. And that's why it's hard to compare those numbers because it was a different staff. Dana Brown's got his work cut out for him, and we're going to see a lot of smaller moves in anticipation for what they're going to do. Probably just worth mentioning here, speaking of hitting coaches, that Alex Centrone is reportedly taking the long drive up to 45 to be the Rangers hitting coach per Michael Schwab. That has not been confirmed yet, but neither has the Rodriguez thing. That also was a source per Brian McTaggart. Moving on to pitching. It was announced this week that Hunter Brown is a Cy Young finalist, well-deserved, but probably more importantly for our discussions here, it's great for the well-being of the team because that earns them a PPI pick following the first round. And then moving on, while we're on the topic of pitchers, Chandler Rome pontificated on his podcast this week on the likelihood of Justin Verlander returning to Houston. Now, he thinks it's a likely scenario, and we've been discussing this for the past couple of weeks. I think it makes a lot of sense. We've talked about the relationship with JV and Jim Crane, how there's a friendship there. It makes a lot of sense from that regard, especially from a commitment standpoint, just a 1-year minimal commitment, and Jim Crane loves short contracts. I do wonder, though, we've talked about it from the standpoint of would we want to see it? How likely is the scenario? Let's turn that around, though. I wonder, given the past 2 seasons for Houston, how much does JV want to be in Houston?
Interesting question. He's a very smart guy, an observer of baseball history. I loved how acutely aware that he was of his place in history as he was climbing lists, not in an egomaniacal way, but in a driven way. But would he be susceptible? Oh, Altuve and Correa. Well, they're not the players that they used to be. Neither is Verlander. Salaries are another scoreboard. I mean, Justin Verlander's made well over $250 million. He went to a Giants team that was not an on-paper strong contender. They could have offered him the most money. They gave him $15 million. He's not going to get, I don't think, the biggest offer from the Astros, but if it's just $2 million different, I mean, he knows the race for 300 is over after winning just 4 games last season and still being like 38 wins away. He'll be 43 years old. He made 29 starts. That's a good thing. But what's the likelihood of him holding up that healthily in his age 43 season? If the Astros starting rotation net result is Framber Valdez out, Justin Verlander and Nate Pearson in, the Astros got worse or get worse.
Oh, yeah. I think we could all agree, even if they get Verlander, they have to go out and get another legit starting pitcher this offseason. I'll be extremely disappointed if they don't go put some serious money into somebody. I'm not saying $150 million or anything, but go find somebody you think you can depend on to go along with Verlander. I don't think that's enough just to add Verlander. I would feel better, though, losing Framber, that if I at least get Verlander with Javier and with Hunter Brown, I'd start to feel a little bit better about that. And especially on a 1-year deal, if they're paying him 10, 12 million bucks, I think I'm okay with it. I don't want to go back to 15. There is something to that, Charlie, where Verlander's always kind of had that Peyton Manning thing where it's like, I'm taking the most money. Even Peyton Manning, after he made all that money, he was trying to max out everything he could with the Colts and with the Broncos. And Verlander took the most money last year. And we remember when, he went to the Mets. We thought he was going to take top dollar, and he did. So I think that's something to consider. I think Detroit makes a lot of sense. They're a good ball club. We'll see what happens with their pitching staff, with all kinds of trade rumors. Maybe he wants to go back there where he started. They have a good ball club. They can win some games there. So I think Detroit or Houston probably makes the most sense.
We talked a couple weeks ago how Verlander, he's 4-11. But 1-loss record, deceptive, 3.85 ERA, competitive for a back end of the rotation guy, 2.99 after the All-Star break, 2.08, 5 starts in September, but he will be a year older. San Francisco, Oracle Park, much better pitcher's park than is Daikin Park. If you're bringing Verlander, it should be as a 5th starter. And if he outperforms that, wonderful. But to me, it's to get rid of a dozen McCullers starts and 9 Colt Gordon starts. Not that, hey, JV the 3rd time around is a number 2 or number 3 starter.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense from Houston's standpoint, the minimal investment. Jim Crane would love to promote more JV days at the ballpark, at the spike attendance. It's another big name to sell jerseys for and merch and blah, blah, blah. However, well, and I also think from the standpoint of too, like, it makes sense where I could totally see the Astros making a bunch of moves on the margin and then waiting to see what the team looks like and what they need, and to really maybe go all in at the trade deadline where they maybe feel like they're a couple players away. But I do wonder if Jim Crane looks at this and goes, I don't know that this team is a big frontline starter away from bridging the gap between where they are now and where they need to be. I think that helps a lot, but I don't know that Jim Crane has ever shown that sort of appetite outside of bringing in a really high dollar, high ticket priced closer. But I don't know. I'm really torn on it. I could see them being pretty conservative going into the season just to see what they have and then to see how much they should commit, because otherwise you might want to take, you might start wanting to sell off some assets. What that might be, I don't know. But if JV is prioritizing wins, this is the reason why I asked the question. If JV's prioritizing wins, I don't necessarily see Houston as the destination for him. I could see Detroit being a destination where he can retire where he started and chase a few more wins before he hangs it up. So it's really hard to say. I'd personally love to see JV back in Houston, especially if we're not going to get anything else. I think he's on this team better than a 5th starter. Just that's not a high bar to clear. Now, want to move on to this last topic because this one came across my timeline earlier this week, and Astros fans had thoughts. I had some thoughts, so figured we'd knock it around here. Ken Rosenthal on the Foul Territory Network, talking about he was reacting to the Dodgers championship most recently. He said, quote, I dare to say, even if we were in a salary cap era, the Dodgers would still be winning championships. Even though they are supreme spenders, you have to admire what they've accomplished as an organization. Now, there's no doubt the Dodgers are a well-run organization. There's no denying that. Do a very good job of drafting, developing. However, just to put some things in perspective, the CBT for 2025 was $224 million. The Dodgers TV deal alone is worth $334 million a year. Their luxury tax was in excess of $375 million, which doesn't count deferrals. They spent over $1 billion in the offseason salary. They rolled out a literal $1 billion pitching staff in the World Series. Now, money isn't everything, and I'm not saying that a cap would in any way help Houston, considering the amount of money they've misspent, because it's not that they aren't spenders. It's just they may have misallocated funds and investments. But I wanted to ask you guys your reaction to this. How much truth do you see in Rosenthal's statement there? And how much does it really disregard the growing disparity between the haves and have-nots among even billionaire owners?
Well, they're not mutually exclusive factors. I mean, postseason baseball is a dice roll. So that's why the best team in baseball year to year rarely wins the World Series now. 8 times in 31 years of the wild card era has the team with the most wins in the regular season done it. Milwaukee Brewers won the most games in the National League this year. Toronto did, along with the Yankees, win the most in the American League. It's who does it in October or to the first day of November, depending on how the calendar falls in a given year. But the Dodgers are very well run. The New York Mets spending like no other. Now, the Yankees have winning seasons every year, but their World Series drought goes to 2009. They're not rubbing nickels together. The Dodgers, you're born on third base. It doesn't mean you hit a triple, but they drive the runs in. Helmed on the baseball decision-making side by native Houstonian Andrew Friedman, who built the Rays overachieve bang for a buck machine going back to the aughts. And then when he got to play with the Dodgers budget, well, they qualify as a dynasty. 3 World Series titles within 6 years, the first to go back-to-back since the Yankees won 3 in a row. And of course, they can spend, and if there's a mistake or an injury, just pay over it and spend. But consider this. The Astros farm system is one of the worst in the game presently. You can't spend your way in the draft. You can't buy draft picks from other teams. In your international expenditures, there are limitations. The Astros farm system at this point is a wasteland. The Dodgers farm system is ranked in the top 2 or 3 in the game, number 1 in the game midseason by MLB Pipeline. The Dodgers pick low in the first round every year. 3 of the top 7 outfield prospects in the entire minor leagues, Dodgers prospects. They didn't get them because they spent tens of millions of dollars and went way beyond the budget that other teams had. It's because they've drafted, developed, they've signed tactically in the international market. Now, maybe none of those guys amount to anything, but the odds are at least one of them will, or they'll have trade capital that the Astros did back in the mid-teens when Jeff Luna was able to trade highly regarded prospects, not one of which became a good major league player. Jake Rogers, the close to it, but all your Seth Beer and Daz Cameron types that enabled the Astros to trade for Verlander and Cole, Colin Moran, Michael Feliz, anybody? Zach Greinke. Now, their farm system, right? It's easy to pile on Dana Brown if he doesn't make magic in this offseason. But Dana Brown has very little to work with to go out in the trade market. Of course, his signature was in the area of player development. His first-round draft choices, not fast-tracking it to the major leagues. Right? Bryce Matthews, Walker Yannick. And this week, the Astros lost their farm director. You know, whether it's brain drain or just a loss, Jacob Buffa leaving to go become the Cardinals' director of international scouting. But if you lose the farm director, when what's been the harvest on the farm isn't much of a loss.
Yeah, look, you have to give him credit for getting there, showing up, winning the games, going through the postseason, taking care of a really impressive Toronto team. But at the end of the day, it's just the Astros don't play in that type of game. They don't go out and sign guys like Ohtani in free agency or Freddie Freeman, or they just can't play that game. They can't afford it. The most I can think of is them paying Hader the contract that he signed a couple years ago. But, you know, that's not even $100 million. And we're talking about guys getting like $700 million. So sure, you give them all the credit. And baseball is a thing where you get into the postseason and you never know what's going to happen. But I mean, we can't ignore the Yankees did a lot of this, you know, years ago, where they would go out and get whoever the big guy was, bring him over, A-Rod, whoever it was, they'd go make the move, whether it was trade or free agency. And now the Dodgers are kind of that team, and the Mets aren't as good at it yet. We'll see how that goes along here. But, you know, as an Astros fan, I'm like, you know, way to go, great job, whatever. I was rooting for the Blue Jays, but with the amount of talent they have on their team, it's one of those deals where if you don't go out and win it, your season was a loss. It's one of those things where I'm not going to give you all that much credit for winning it, but I am going to put a lot of blame on you if you don't pull it off.
Yeah, the time horizon, obviously, if you can wallet whip most of your competitors over time, it's a huge, huge advantage. Well-run, smaller market teams that just harness the right number of prospects, maybe make the strategic signing here or there that works out. They can have windows. Think of the Oakland A's teams back in the early 2000s, the Moneyball stuff. The Rays have had a couple of different windows of going to the playoffs repeatedly in a 5-6 year period. The Minnesota Twins have had a couple of separate stretches. But the Dodgers are a perennial, right? 13 division titles in 14 years or 12 in 13 years. Hey, the Astros had gone 8 years in a row, 7 American League Championship Series, which over time I think will grow in terms of the magnificence of that accomplishment. But in the end, even with the table tilted in the Dodgers' favor, they still had to do the job. The Blue Jays offered Ohtani the same contract. The Giants basically offered Ohtani the same contract. He picked the Dodgers because it's an organization synonymous with winning, and California taxes really aren't an issue when you're making that much money, no matter how much your interpreter steals from you.
Allegedly. The salary cap.
Criminally.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying stolen. But look, the salary cap brings a whole other set of constraints with it, which is that teams can't spend their way out of bad mistakes. But that goes both ways. And look, Josh mentioned it in the previous era. The Yankees used to be the big bad. The team that spent freely used the rest of the league as their developmental system to sign players like, hey, it's a nice prospect you got there. Now that he's a free agent, we'll take him now. In the modern era, it's been the Dodgers and Mets that just spend crazy money, but the Mets haven't been able to convert that into a championship. So it's not just about the money, but it's hard to ignore the disparity. And just, again, that TV contract alone for the Dodgers that's a big difference. And I don't know that a salary cap solves anything per se. I think there's a real, should they go down that route, there's going to be a real problem to solve, which is how do you untie this knot for teams that have been allowed to defer money and have all these big contracts on the book? Is there some sort of salary amnesty that's allowed to happen, like we saw within the NBA, in which teams were able to cut ties with really punitive contracts? So we'll see. I'm not necessarily a proponent of a salary cap, but I think I am a proponent of a salary floor, because I think it's time to motivate other teams to spend more, and to where it's not just a cheap money making ploy for teams that want to just be marginally in it and own an organization. Final thoughts before we're out the door, guys.
The general managers meetings come up first of the week. Dana Brown will be out in Las Vegas. Generally, the GM meetings sort of lay the foundation. Typically not a huge point when trades happen. Now, I don't know if there'll be free agents, right? The green flag dropping on that Thursday. With the lockout looming post 2026, how will owners look at spending and budgeting? And if we're coming out of a lockout, we know attendance is going to be down, revenues are going to be down. Will there be more players apt to try to jump for money sooner to lock it in while whatever is out on the market is out on the market? But the general managers meetings upcoming this week coming, and then the winter meetings early December, where typically a lot of the heavy lifting gets done.
Yeah, I think my final thought there will be, whatever changes they do make, Brandon, they're not going to do something that's going to screw over the Dodgers. You know what I mean? They're not going to. They'll find a way to make it not totally kill the Dodgers, whatever it is. They're too important. That makes them too much money. Yankees too. They're not going to crush their big market teams. And then, speaking of big market and money, officially Bregman and Pete Alonso opted out of their deals. We've heard reports that the Astros, for some reason, have interest in Alonso, even though they already have a first baseman they just brought in. He wasn't that great, but they gave him a ton of money. So I'm curious to see where that goes, because the amount of money he's projected to make is nothing that Jim Crane would consider to pay. So I'm wondering, where are these reports coming from?
Yeah, we also got news this week that the World Series had a 50% higher viewership than the NBA Finals did. So I think that just goes to show you why the Dodgers are so valuable to this league. And also, I think it's a positive sign for people being interested in baseball. I think that it's nice to see. We have heard so much about baseball being dead, the need for all of these innovations like the pitch clock and things like that. I'm still not sold on the pitch clock per se. I think probably a couple seconds on it would be nice. Just given the amount of injuries that we've seen, I can't necessarily say that it's causation, but I do think there is correlation to the spike in TJ surgeries. Outside of that, I think it's this offseason we're going to see how hungry Jim Crane is really to right this ship, or how pragmatic he is about the state about this team. Is the window still open? Or as you said, Charlie, is the reckoning here? One last reminder, if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to click like on the video. And if you listen on podcasts on apps like Apple or Spotify, give us a 5-star rating while you're here. As Charlie said, you can donate to the show by going to buymeacoffee.com/StoneColdStros. Give a little, give a lot, or not. You don't have to. For Charlie and Josh, I'm Brandon saying so long. Thanks for listening. As always, go Stros.